Hi there. Good evening, everyone. I hope that you have had a positive start of this week, and I'm hoping that you're going to enjoy the session, the live chat that I'm going to have today with Professor Wilson about branding and brand identity. I'm going to invite Professor Wilson, and we're going to have a fruitful discussion on branding, brand identity, and the importance of branding in the retail environment. And we're going to discuss the importance of branding in the viability of any business today and other issues related to that. I mean, branding and brand identity have become indispensable today to any brand's visibility. And in today's busy environment, if a brand fails to have a clear identity, it would be fatal to him or to his business. I'm going to invite the man who knows everything about branding, Professor Wilson. Hey.
How you doing?
How you do? Thank you for joining me today.
Oh, thanks for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be with you. How's life in Paris?
Good. We couldn't complain with all of the confinement issues that we have been having, but I mean, I guess it's the same thing across across the channel.
Yeah, there's so much going on at the minute, right? There's rolling news. We've got Blackout Tuesday today.
Yeah.
There's just a lot going on, and then we're all trying to put on our best faces and hold our jobs down, right? Look after our families, educate our children, shop online.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Essentials and basics, I think.
yeah, of course. But I think one of the things I'd like to say, which is interesting, but it's also challenging, is that with the pandemic, we are being asked to basically choose between economics and health. And I think that's a very troubling thing for me, because if you listen to governments and scientists and sociologists and experts and your friends on social media, a lot of the time, the question is not whether something is safe or not, but whether we can stand to be in this kind of hibernation or isolation for such a long amount of time, not because it's bad for our health, but because it's bad for the economy. And I think this is probably the first time that I've been faced with such a dilemma, and that we all have for companies, because on one level, it makes perfect sense. Health always comes first, right? But on another level, if it means that companies are having to close, and many companies are closing, and people are losing their jobs, and then, and that has an impact on your health, on your mental health, then these really are some kind of real challenges that I think none of us have had to face before.
And how are brands standing, facing to that? I mean, there have been lots of talk about how the brands are going to reinvent themselves after this situation. Do you think there are going to be challenges to brands?
Yeah, well, I think that there are challenges now, but I'm quite conservative in my thinking about whether it's going to change things forever. I think there are lots of people that say, oh, this is a new dawn or a new age, and in the future, business will be like this, or retail will be like this, or brands will be like this. And I have more of a skeptical view. I think that if you look, I mean, let's go back to Blackout Tuesday, or what's going on with Black Lives Matter. What we see is that there are a number of companies which have decided that they want to align their corporate values with those values of a significant portion of their audience, and they're using their brand identity and reputation to amplify the message to open up the discussion. So in basic English, what I'm saying is that there are companies now that visibly want to go on record as saying that they are against racism, and they have created different logos, idents, advertising campaigns, posts on social media, Even if you look on LinkedIn, you've got Netflix, you've got Nike, you've got Adidas, you've got all of these companies that are standing shoulder to shoulder with people that are in this struggle. So that it's not something which is just affecting minorities, but it's something in the mainstream. And then even today we can look at Facebook being faced with challenges about how they dictate what is fake news, what is authentic news. So this is a new reality that we're faced with social media. Now, I make these points, and then if we go away from kind of civil rights and politics and we go more towards classical branding, so you think about the Coca-Colas and the Pepsis, you know, one company, Coca-Cola, freezes its marketing spend, and another one will increase its spend. Because if we look, I think a lot of literature has pointed to the idea that in a recession, and so some people have assumed that because we are kind of isolating or hibernating, that this is similar to experiencing a recession, which is basically, you know, there's a reduction in consumption and spend. And therefore, if you have the money, if you increase your spend in a time of scarcity, you increase your brand visibility. And that allows you to increase your brand's value and equity and to do something very special. So I can remember it's probably about nearly 20 years ago when the dot-com bubble burst, and I was working on an advertising campaign because I used to work in advertising, right? So one of my clients was in the tech sector, and they increased their advertising spend fivefold. So if you think about in magazines, when their competitors were doing one advert in a magazine, our campaign was doing 5, sometimes even 7. And the rationale was that this would send a clear message that whatever's happening in the world, this company is built to last and it's not affecting them. They are reliable, they are trustworthy, and they are more visible. And this would then convert into increasing your brand value. It might not in the short term lead to sales. And that's also where I'd make the distinction between kind of the marketing and sales objectives and the brand's objectives. Marketing and sales is about communicating to get money into the company as quickly as possible. And branding is that investment in the future that eventually will lead to the same conclusion, which is to increase your value and your money. So if I give people an example, an analogy, you go to university and you spend a lot of money and you get yourself in debt. You're building your brand. Of course, you're learning something, you meet new people, you're making yourself more employable. But essentially, if you really wanted to make money, if your objective was, I'm going to university to get a good job to make money, there are great jobs that you could get today. Like I always felt that if I lost my job, then one of the things that I could do is buy a load of baguettes, buy a load of hot dogs, and go outside of somewhere, go outside a cinema, go outside a mosque on Friday after prayer, wherever it is, and I would sell all of these hot dogs and baguettes, £1 each. You sell 500, you got £500. Then you buy another cart and another cart. That's how you make money, right?
Yeah.
But I couldn't do that forever. I wouldn't want to do that for the next 50 years of my life. Some people do, but it's not what I'd like to do, right? So that's why I went to university, to get a qualification that eventually you hope will translate to an acceleration, an increase in your ability to make money, right? Yeah. And so branding is very similar. It's that investment. Now, what I'd say then is that why the pandemic is different for me and why it isn't necessarily the case that I would encourage all brands to increase their spend is because there are so many unknowns, things that we don't know about, right? And by that, what I mean is that people's health is being dramatically affected in a way that isn't affected with regards, like comparing it with a normal recession. So if you think about, like, I know I've got colleagues, I've got students, I've got family that have contracted COVID-19. I've even, one of my uncles passed away in New York from COVID-19. So this is real. So if I look on Instagram and I see some people living their best life, celebrating with a glass of champagne, I'm not mad at that, right? But they say this has been the best time ever. It's not the same if you've got family at risk who've suffered, or if you are educating your children at home and your employer expects you to work longer hours than before because the company could go under, and you're having to educate 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, how many of the kids you want, each that needs their own device, it's mayhem. So if we go back to branding, what that means is that if you put an advert that doesn't resonate with people and the mood and the emotions that they're feeling, you could actually alienate your brand and people could have a strong dislike for your brand. So there are only a small number of brands that have been built with an identity and a personality that fits with this current mood. And there are other brands where perhaps I'd actually say, save your money and say nothing. If you can't say something good or cool or something that's going to increase your brand reputation,
Don't
say
it a lot.
nothing. Which is also why, you know, even I would challenge, you know, everyone is being encouraged now with Blackout Tuesday, Black Lives Matter, to talk about racism. We should, but I'd also say, let's be honest, be careful, because not everybody has spent enough time learning the skills to be able to come out in a positive way. You could attract an audience or comments that could have a blowback effect that you hadn't thought about. So I think the thing about branding is you're playing the long game. And there are some global brands that are actually also suspending their brand spend. And now some experts would disagree with me and say, oh, but out of sight, out of mind, you'll be forgotten. But I'd actually say that, you know, hopefully when this pandemic is over, let's say in a year's time, if you come back and advertise again, people aren't going to say, oh, you're the company that never advertised when I was suffering with COVID. I actually think that we will have a very short memory 1 year, 2 years down the line, that actually there are going to be many companies that actually it was the wise thing to actually just hibernate, to do nothing. I think that's important too, because actually doing nothing means that you hold on to your brand.
You're taking a stand.
And you hold on to your business.
Yes.
You know?
Professor Wilson, let's go back to the basics. What you said is really important and interesting, and it would mean that before we take action and relate to that new, before we take action and relate to that new normal that we're talking about, we really need to understand who is our brand, what do we stand for, right? Yeah. And as you're saying, we really failed to do that. So if we're going back to the basics between what could we say about branding and brand identity and its importance today in taking action and responsible action?
Okay, so I'm actually literally writing a paper at the minute that I've just finished, and it's hopefully it'll come out this year. And I tried to come up with new definitions. So I'm going to read out these definitions. So if we think, what is a brand? I'm basically saying that a brand buys you something which is a blend of tangible and intangible functions. It is a human form of cultural expression, and it's designed to communicate meaning and deliver current or future value, which may accrue over time. Now, in plain English, what I'm basically saying is that I recognize that branding is one of those things that I would link to just being a human being. If you think about hieroglyphs, you think about cave paintings, you think about the idea of symbols and people expressing themselves in a language, a visual pictorial language that communicates sentiments, emotions, meaning. Branding is really at the apex of that. Yeah. Now, what I'm going to say in a social media world and now for consumers, that we've moved away from traditional economic thinking to accept that, yeah, if I buy a status pair of shoes or bag, it can actually help me to accrue value. Let me give you a classic example, right? That there has been research, especially for people from minority communities. If you are Black, for example, or if you are a woman, even though women aren't minorities, but you know what I mean. If you went to a job interview with an expensive handbag and suit, it could overcome negative perceptions that people may have about how serious you are about the job, about your professionalism, about your socioeconomic group. So I think it's a mistake that sometimes people think about rap videos and wearing a gold chain. I'm talking about the strategic decision that some members of the community make, and it has a definite value. If you're already from aristocracy, if you're already from the elite, if you're already powerful, then the influence is minimal. But we can't deny the fact that if you go, go to Paris, and I've hung out in Louis Vuitton store, you see people from all sorts of backgrounds purchasing objects, treating themselves, but the status element of that brand also translates into something where when they interact with people, people think differently about them. And if you are careful and strategic about that, it can have a positive impact. So that's why I'm saying that a brand buys you something. It's not just that you have bought the product, but it's also buying you a form of social currency.
Mm-hmm.
And that works two ways. It's not just for the company, but it's also for the consumer.
Yeah.
But even a more basic definition would be, it's simple. If you had a plain pair of sneakers with no logo, no made in Bangladesh, no made in Taiwan, they would be worth a certain amount of money. The minute that you put a logo on it, if you have the right logo and it's the right shape and the right meaning, you can charge a premium. So really, this is when the brand starts to work. It's when this is made by this artisan or it's from this company that actually this product is worth more money. So that's the heavy lifting that the brand does. And to get there, of course, it takes some time and it takes a lot of spend. Now, the second point, branding, right, the verb, right, the doing word, I would say branding is a strategic and concise means of expressing, amplifying, and controlling who you are, what you do, who you're associated with, and what you own. And that's for competitive games. So you use a variety of communications methods, media, and that's collaborative and it's measurable. So if we take an example of some people that talk about doing personal branding, right? Now, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. For me, branding by classical definitions would be it helps you to get more money, power, respect, be more trustworthy, and more forgivable. There are people out there doing personal branding, but they still can't charge any money. So I would question whether they have a brand. They have a name, they have their image, they have their identity, but if you can't make money from the branding activities eventually that you're doing, I'm not sure you have a brand.
Have a brand, yeah.
I'm sorry for some of the influencers out there that might, but you might say that eventually you reach that point, but in its current state, really, for me, we can't get away from the fact that branding is about making money. It is a business.
Yes. And today we're paying now attention to the importance of branding to the person and to the business, to the brand.
Yeah.
And we have said that the brand can yield lots of positivity to the person, his status in terms of his ownership, etc. And if we translate that to today, the brand and its physical assets, all of the outlets that it has, all of its distribution channels, whether online and offline, to what extent the brand's identity has to be strong in order to help the brand gain that recognition and gain that connection through its identity and physical outlets. I mean, how important is branding today in relation to everything that the brand puts in front of the customer?
Well, I'm a branding professor, so I'm going to tell you it's very important, right? But to give you some further evidence, if we think now, there are universities, the stronger universities with the stronger brands will still get students. If they say online learning, they will still get students. Even if we go back in history, and I remember talking to some professors who did research, even the physicist Sir Isaac Newton did a form of branding and advertising. In his laboratory book, he had adverts in there saying, if you want to recreate my experiments, you can buy the equipment from this store. So he was actively marketing and branding and promoting his name, right? The best example, Newton's laws of motion. It's not anybody else's laws, it's his laws, right? So I want people to think that actually, sometimes branding seems like a swear word or something, but actually, if you're a scientist and you want to get your theory out there, if people don't know about you, your institution, your reputation, if they don't remember your name or where to find you, you're going to struggle. Branding is a core skill for a lot of us, and especially in a world where we're connected, with social media, we're being bombarded with information.
Yeah.
It's the things that stick in your head.
Yeah.
The things that stick in your head. So I could argue that, you know, I'm not at Oxford and I'm not at Harvard and I'm not at MIT, but if you went through your LinkedIn feed, you might see a guy with an afro, right? And that might make me stand out, or you might remember me, or might be curious. And
Yes.
so I think that this is the positive, that for smaller brands, for independents, and I know that your area is ephemeral retailing, this becomes a great opportunity. Now you have more eyeballs on the internet, that actually the competition ground is much more level, because before the internet, you know, the top brands would buy billboards, right? And
Yes.
most of us can't afford billboards. I remember even years ago when I was at university and I was DJing, right? I used to DJ in a club, and when I would promote my my club night, I remember thinking, if only I could get bigger posters. And I actually remember, this is funny because I actually remember managing to make a big poster. I couldn't afford to buy one, and I actually found a way on my computer to print out a poster with A4, and I stuck the bits together, and I got the plastic, and I went to art college because I thought, if I have a bigger poster on a billboard, then
Yeah.
I will stand out, I will have more credibility. And it worked. I got more people come to the club night. So
Yeah.
I understood that standing out is important. But in the old days, before the internet, that was billboards, that was mainstream television, right? But now, if we look at with the internet, you know, if you look at some great podcasts, some of the podcasts, Joe Rogan just signed a deal with Spotify. A podcast that I personally enjoy watching a lot is Mike Tyson. It's on YouTube, right? It's not Kimmel. It's not like, you know, one of these other talk shows on cable, but you can see that the opportunities are vast. And then if we think about, you know, I was joking with a friend who was looking at the profiles of academics, and someone saying how many citations they had. And I said, but it's nothing compared to Travis Scott, because Travis Scott went on Fortnite and got 12.3 million for his launch, right? And then I think it went to 27 million, and then it was like 48.5 because people came back twice. So this is the new reality, which is going to play into the hands and be an advantage to some new entrants into the business, people, younger people, or people with new ways of thinking, or people that have no choice. And often the no choice aspect, where, you know, you don't have money or you don't have a big team, then you find more innovative ways. And similarly, I would say that was the same for me on LinkedIn, that when I realized that I wasn't from one of the top universities that people remember if you ask them, that actually when I looked on LinkedIn, I saw that actually hardly any academics were on LinkedIn. So I thought, well, if I do that, then I have an opportunity, or at least I get to learn and have some fun.
Yes. So you are looking at ways as a brand to stand out, to have something unique, and to have a personalized actually aspect that would help people recognize you and remember you. I think this is the mark of today's world. Professor Wilson, we have lots of waves, and someone said he has joined from Indonesia and sends you his greets.
Selamat pagi, Indonesia. Selamat pagi.
Indonesian.
Yeah.
So we say thank you for we have a little question. Someone is asking if there is a difference between personal branding and company branding, when we brand a person or when we brand a service or a product. Is there a difference that we should look at?
I don't think there is a difference. I think the only difference is it's more complicated and expensive for a company. Probably the most expensive brand is a country. And so when I did some work with the Indonesian Ministry of Tourism, and one of the things that I was trying to get them to understand was actually to brand a country is a fantastic thing to do, but it's incredibly complicated and expensive. But the potential for that is immense, because if you have one of those badges, I mean, you're in France, right? Made in France means something when it comes to certain products, or made in Japan or made in Germany. If you're from one of these other countries, that if you could increase your brand, then every person, every business, every citizen then has an increased social currency and capital, which translates into everybody being able to make money. But it takes time and it's tough. So when you think about a corporate brand, you're wanting people to think about your brand and the sum total of all of those people that work for you, all of those experiences, all of those products, all of those services, so that in a split second they have a feeling about you.
Yes.
And that's hard, because all the time you could have a bad experience in the store, or you meet an employee that doesn't seem to have the same attributes and values to the advertising campaign that you've just seen. So it's harder to control and to engineer. But it's exactly the same theory as if you're an individual, because you would think that to control your brand as an individual, because it's just you, it's easy. I am my own manager, right? So I know what jokes I can say, like what posts I can put out. I know what I'm doing. But then if you have a company and you decide that you have an identity where you want to be fun and funny, and you're employing 500 people, and you've got 50 people who are active on social media, how do they all follow the same approach
Guideline
to fun?
or
Yeah,
approach? Yes.
yeah.
Yes. Sure, thank you. I have to take you closer to the topic of pop-up retailing and branding,
Okay.
if I may.
Yeah.
And since this is the highlight or the core of this page, I mean, with your experience, pop-up stores today are taking a greater importance in terms of branding, brand adoption. We're seeing them everywhere, and they are being adopted by smaller brands or startups, as well as mature brands or global brands. So how can a pop-up store enhance a brand's identity?
So I view pop-up stores like, because as well as being a DJ, I was a professional musician for a few years. And it's like so for me, it's like doing a show, that when you record an album, you have many months to try and to perfect and to improve. And that's like building a physical store. You invest a lot of time and effort into those. But for a pop-up store, it's like doing a live show, so that you have, because it's ephemeral, you have a small window when you have to build this thing, and it has to be more exciting and immersive and rich than all the other physical stores. And you have to then create an environment where you are drawing people in like a live show, because you're only there for a short amount of time. If you can do that, and so actually, for me, pop-up shops requires cross-disciplinary skills. It is about branding, and it is about retail, and it is about in-store design, but it's also about event management. If you think about your store like an event, a definite start and finish, then I think that's really important. You shouldn't just rely upon the fact that you're here and you rely upon passing trade. You have to generate a buzz and a noise where enough people at the same time are feeling a pull towards coming to your store. And
Yes.
I would say, whether you're a small business or whether you're a large business, it doesn't matter. Like, I remember one of my old students did a collaboration with Jay-Z, and Jay-Z had a pop-up store for his 30-year anniversary for his albums, right? And that was in New York. So Jay-Z has a pop-up store with memorabilia, buy my records, buy the scarves from my old student, issue scarves, the anti-paparazzi scarves, and then disappears. But you can still generate noise afterwards, right? Because then people will look forward to the next iteration, to the next pop-up store. So I think that's the other thing, that you should also, if you think about that kind of live experience, normally as a musician, I don't just do one live show. I'm going to go on tour. Mm-hmm. Now, it could be the case at the pop-up store, like your tour takes you 2 years, right? And that means in 2 years, you do 6 pop-up stores. That's fine. I still think that the mentality is that you think of it as being on tour, so that you have this concept, and then you're able to make minor adjustments, but then you have to keep the publicity going for the next iteration. But you're the expert. So what would you say? You've written a book.
Yes. I mean, We've done some research. I mean, yes, we have to draw like a line, a connecting line between several pop-up stores that we're doing, and we have to keep these pop-up stores alive. Most of the times, we talk to clients who are interested in doing pop-up stores, and they fail to connect their pop-up activities with their identity. Sometimes, when touring and moving from one pop-up to the other, the brand's identity risks the deterioration. And this is important. And I really would like to highlight this with you because you're a branding specialist, and we have to really keep hanging our pop-ups, even if we're repeating several ones with our identity.
Yeah,
And
so
sometimes we're failing to do this.
yeah, I think so. You've raised two interesting points, and one of them I would say is that sometimes, because if you do a pop-up store, it's in a designated area, and it's an area that other people have done pop-up stores. It's like if you're a band and you do a show at a live venue, the venue is fixed, the location is fixed, and so you
Yeah.
are limited in what you can do. Now, one of the mistakes that people make is that if they do a show in a particular venue, they think, oh, because I'm in that venue, automatically I will get publicity or I will get customers. You might not, right? So one piece of advice I'd give is don't rely upon the location and the venue as being enough to market what it is that you do. Now, the next thing then is that if you are
Yeah.
dealing with these fixed constraints, how do you get this experience? Well, being a musician, I would say that, you know, the tricks that we used, it's not just the product, but it is the experience. And so, like, you know, if you're in a band, everything from the lights, we had smoke, right? We had music, which helps. But I would also include in that, like, the smell, like literally, if you're in a pop-up store, I would recommend going to one. Okay, what fragrance are you going to use? Yeah. What decoration are you going to use? What music? What playlist do you have? Yeah. And even I remember, like, you know, one of the things that I did, actually, I've forgotten about this. When I was DJing, one of the things I did was I made a mixtape, right? And so I did like a 60-minute mixtape of all the songs that I was DJing, the typical songs, and I gave them to every fashion store in the city. And I said, could you play this in your store?
Yeah.
Right? So I
And did
wanted
they all agree to?
a lot of them did, because a lot of stores they don't know what to. But this is before iPhones, right? But that's a challenge. Like, how do you play something? They didn't play it like every day.
Yes, yes, yes. Professor Wilson, I think your audio is lagging a little bit. Professor Wilson, I think your audio is lagging a little bit. I will leave just a second for you to maybe restart the connection because I don't know if you're getting me or not. Are you getting? I think we're lagging a little bit. We're having some trouble. Yeah, it's not actually. It's still lagging. I think we're having a little trouble. I would re-invite Professor Wilson in a few. I'm just waiting for the connection uh, to run over because I think we're having a little trouble. And I'm going to ask Professor Wilson if he can maybe disconnect. To reconnect, I'm going to ask the professor to reconnect. Maybe he's listening. I don't know. No. So we're going to. I'm going to ask Professor Wilson in again because I think we had a little trouble with the connection. So just for those who joined me and joined Professor Wilson, we're talking to someone who has spent over 20 years in industry and in academia and specializing in what he calls the ABCD of business and culture. So with Professor Wilson, we're talking about advertising, branding, communications, and digital. And Professor Wilson is a multi-award winning academic partner at a London firm that is called Dragonfly Black. I'm going to also run in a few the publications and the book that Professor Wilson has published. So I don't know if we're going to manage to join Professor Wilson or not, because I think he's having 4G trouble. I'm going to wait a few minutes, hoping for him to reconnect with me, and I will take advantage of this little moment to show you his website. And his book. And if you are all with me right now, I will ask you to bear a little moment and I will try to connect with Professor Wilson again if he is going to be able to. Otherwise, I would be very sorry to tell you that we might close the session. So I'm going to ask you to bear with me one more minute. I'm just taking a final okay from Professor Wilson to see if he is going to be able to connect or not. Otherwise, we will try to actually do another session, or I think that you are all welcome to send in your questions or your comments. I think Professor Wilson is telling me that the connection is timing out, and I'm sorry to tell you that I'm going to have to stop. So I would invite you again to send in your questions or your comments by direct message, and we will try to we will do another live session very, very soon, and hopefully try to answer to the questions that you have. Thank you all for joining me today and joining Professor Wilson, and for commenting, sharing insights, and I hope that we have covered actually all of the themes that we were hoping to hear about branding and brand identity. And I will be joining you very, very soon in another episode in a few minutes. So thank you all for joining me and have a nice afternoon. And thank you, Professor Wilson, for all your information and all of the important details related to branding and brand identity.